Thank you for joining us for 3Bs on the Law podcast, hosted by Trisha Barita, Camille Canali, and Susan Dawson. Disclaimer, this podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only, not meant to provide legal advice, and does not create an attorney-client relationship. Also, remember, laws change or they differ by jurisdiction, so this is not a substitute for seeking legal counsel in your jurisdiction on the current law applicable to you.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Season 4 of 3Bs on the Law. Today, we're going to talk about incident reports. It's something that many employers don't do, and quite frankly, I like them because it documents what happened. So even if perhaps you have some responsibility, at least you document what happened, you document, what needs to be done. And so today we wanted to talk a little bit about what should be included in an incident report.
Right.
And why you do it.
And I think some people are so busy dealing with the incident that they just they forget about the report, and then they never go back and do it. Right. So that's, but they're important. You never, just like Trisha, you said on the podcast when we were talking about drug-free workplace, you said you don't think about needing it right away. And then a couple of days later or a week later, you're like, oh, shoot, I need that report. Right. It's just like that. It's another one of those. So
yeah, I mean, when I really think this is like the worst, but I always think about this when this issue comes up. I'm always like, what if the employee who was your key witness quits tomorrow? There is like and moves to somewhere else, moves to Alaska. Let's just say that everyone that's hard to get to, I think, is in Alaska. So
all of our listeners in Alaska, we're going to be getting emails.
We don't have any listeners in Alaska.
Maybe now we will.
I would like to have a couple of listeners in Alaska, but I don't know. They but hiding among the moose or whatever. But like, look, I think that like what happens is that's a real thing. Employees, and you don't know what's going on with other employees. And if you've got witnesses, you need to get those statements then and get them signed and dated so that you have something, at least. It may not be the most admissible, but it might be something that, say you have to subpoena that witness. Camille, I'm sure you'd speak to that. Like, you have to have some evidence that person, had some information that you needed. And if you have to make that argument, how are you going to prove that if you just have a bunch of nonsense and the person goes, well, I didn't see anything, you know what I mean, later on, because they don't want to be involved with it. Or they just, they want to change their story. Say they're friends with the person who got in trouble, because I've seen that before too. And you're stuck with, people trying to protect people. And, so I always say, get those statements down, especially the people you have control over, and get them down separately before everyone has like a big powwow about what happened. If you want to make sure that you're getting what actually happened down on paper and part of the file. So.
Right. And you also want to make sure that the person who is actually documenting all of this is identified on the report, because that person could also quit and move to Alaska or Canada or the North Pole or wherever.
Everyone's moving to Alaska.
And there could be a credibility issue, like you said, Trisha, about the person who took the report, perhaps not going into as much detail as needed with her friends.
Yeah.
Who she supervises.
Yeah,
so
it's true.
That's a great point, Trisha.
I'm just kidding about Alaska. I really want to go to Alaska. So we have any Alaska listeners?
We're all daydreaming about vacations right now at the end of COVID, I think.
I know. Well, I'll go to Alaska and we'll do a 3Bs podcast from Alaska.
Only the Texan in the middle of winter would dream of going to Alaska.
That's true.
Yes. But, in addition to just the report itself, you want to document. So, for example, if you have a sexual harassment claim or incident that you're investigating, you also want to gather all the documents that could be relevant, such as if there are text messages or emails, things like that. You want to make sure that those are also included within your report.
Yeah, and text messages are the worst because they're everywhere. That's what everyone uses now for everything, and like, so weird to document because they can just, depending on the personal settings of that phone, that evidence can be gone.
Right.
Right. And if it's an employer phone, you should be able to get a backup of a text message stream if it's done right away and before it's deleted. But, you know, if the employee deletes that, it could be gone, and you don't have those salacious photographs or sexting that's going on between the employees where you now have an issue.
Right. Exactly. Or even just going through the carrier to get them. They don't keep them for very long. They disappear. They're gone.
If they keep them at all. Some
Right.
of them, yeah,
Right.
some of them don't. So yeah, texting is, most lawyers will probably say, is a frustrating piece of evidence, that if you knew it existed and you didn't get it and you don't know what it is, or you find out you could have had it and the other side may have it and you're trying to, you know what I mean? It can be very frustrating because, it's just, there's almost always nowadays text messages about something, about someone has texted someone, and like figuring out how to capture that type of evidence. I also think though, like, while you don't see like phone messages as much, I still think that people use email kind of casually, and that's good evidence as well.
Right. Yeah, you know, for those of you who are Apple users, your cell phone and your text messages actually back up in the cloud. So you may think you have deleted them from one device, and if you've backed up your device, they could still be in existence and you haven't gotten rid of them as fully as you may have.
Are you trying to tell people how to get rid of the text messages?
No. I'm saying you may not have gotten rid of them. And so if you suspect that there may be text messages, a lawyer may subpoena your devices and your cloud to go back to see if they're backed up in there.
A lawyer, AKA Camilla's coming for your text messages. That's what that means.
It is possible. But the other thing are photographs of property damage. You know, if there's an accident, or there's even, injuries is a little bit different. I know if I think I was involved personally in an accident and someone was injured, taking a photograph would be the absolute last thing probably on my mind. I'd be more concerned about the other person. But, if there's only property damage, take pictures of the property damage.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Or if, like, in the last episode when we were talking about the drug testing and those type of accidents, if you do have a supervisor that's in charge, ends up on the scene, they should take some photographs, because those photographs can very well be admissible, possibly, depending on how close they are to the scene and if nothing gets moved. So at least they could testify to some extent, especially if the police are there and the police report matches those photos. They could then be used as evidence as well. And all of this is really important because I can't emphasize enough my thoughts on the fact that you really don't know how big an incident is until later, and you won't know. So you have to treat every one of them seriously. And so, like Susan, I think, was saying, like, hey, a couple of weeks later, you're like, oh my God. And then you start to do this back documentation thing. I can just tell you from being a psychology major, that was a huge discussion, even back when I was taking all those psychology classes, of how eyewitness reports change over time so quickly. And you're going to miss key information if you don't have a plan in place of how to document, I think, within the first 24 to 48 hours, some of these big key pieces, the physical evidence, whether they be photos, emails, or text messages, or video even, of course. And then actually the eyewitness report to those individuals, because it will change. And if you come back to them a couple weeks later, they may miss a key piece. And if it's something where someone was seriously injured, it could really, play a big key role. And what they'll say is, unfortunately, is if they make that 3 weeks later, they come back, then they write their witness statement, they're not going to be able to lie on the stand and say they wrote that within a short period of time. They're going to have to, admit, I made that statement several weeks later. And if there's any discrepancy in there between what happened and what they said, I think a good lawyer is going to call them out and say, hey, well, do you really remember? And a lot of times people in the deposition are going to go, well, I'm not sure. And there you go. You now have a completely unreliable witness. And so I think it's really important to kind of, and if you can guide them in asking questions too, like to make sure that make sure you write down what the scene looked like, make sure if anyone said anything to you in that way, not tell them what to say, obviously, but just so that they get all the information down. Or if you have to conduct a full investigation, make sure those questions are asked.
Right. And different people may have seen or observed different things depending upon where they were located. I mean, think about when you watch a professional football game and they review a play and they look at 3 different cameras, and from one camera, it looks like they're out of bounds. But when you go down the sideline camera, they were in.
Right.
So it all depends also on perception.
I agree. Totally. For sure.
And so now discoverability in litigation. I think that's an interesting piece. I always recommend, if you have a lawyer, that you prepare the report for your lawyer or for the insurance company, because it can be privileged. And I would take the position that it is privileged. Whereas if you just prepare it for the company, it may not be privileged. And if the case goes to litigation, it could be discoverable. And so that is sometimes a bit tricky.
Yeah. And I think that's certainly going to vary state by state and what the laws are, and whether you're in federal or state, state court and the evidentiary rules. But I mean, very true, Camille, like if you can try to wrap it around some type of privilege, then that would be the goal. And the only way you're going to know that, frankly, is having some knowledge and understanding of, talking to an attorney that can help you through that little piece when you're preparing the report.
Or when you're putting the policy together for preparing the report, right? I mean, you want to make sure that the supervisors know, what the best approach. Talk to an attorney and find out what the best approach is in your state. It's a very good point.
Yeah. So I think that's something that everybody should be aware of. These incident reports could be discoverable. So you want to make sure that if you are preparing incident reports, that you do a good job. I mean, it's obvious, but
Camille's coming for that too.
Well, it does come up often in litigation, I hate to say. But anyway, ladies, this was a great discussion again. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of 3Bs on the Law. Thank you for joining us on today's podcast of 3Bs on the Law. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast. We also welcome any comments. If you'd like to get in touch with us or suggest a future topic, you can email us at 3THREEBsonthelaw@gmail.com. And because we're lawyers, we need to remind you that this podcast is not meant to provide you with legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great day.